Tamarinde Haven, Dr. Haven. She studied psychology, philosophy, and epidemiology, and she now works as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Aarhus in Denmark, and she's also partly based here in Amsterdam at this university. Her main interests include responsible supervision, which she's going to talk about today, I think, open science, for example, pre-registration of qualitative research. So, Tamarinde, you were one of Lex's PhD students, one of many PhD students. How many different colors did Lex use when he gave you comments on your manuscripts?
Oh, that'd be almost a rainbow, I think.
Almost a rainbow.
Yeah, he's very creative. You might not know that.
Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you. I would like to share and very much continue the discussion already started by my excellent two speakers before me and share some research results that may help us to think about fostering a responsible research climate where something like responsible supervision also becomes more of the norm. But maybe first let me tell you a little bit about how I understand the research climate. And I draw on this particular definition, that is that it regards the shared meaning organizational members attached to the events, policies, practices and procedures they experience, and importantly for my talk today, the behaviors that they see rewarded, supported and expected. So if you want to learn more about a research climate in particular institutions or a few institutions, it might be meaningful to ask researchers in those institutions, what have you observed? And this is what we did by presenting them a list of behaviors and misbehaviors, and where we also inquired, okay, if you were to observe it, is it really going to potentially hamper the validity of your research findings? And the results surprised us. What you can see here is, or what's most important to take away here is, regardless of the disciplinary field that our respondents came from, overall, there was a shared concern about insufficient supervision or mentoring of junior co-workers, very often PhD candidates. And this struck us, and we followed up with focus groups to learn a little bit more about what is it then that is insufficient, what is insufficient supervision behavior-wise, how people recognize this practice. And this is from a professor in the biomedical sciences who talked about, or who gave the example of having a PhD student and completely throwing her in at the deep end. Then surely you increase the chance of irresponsible supervision. But there are multiple shades to this practice. This is an example from a postdoctoral researcher from the social sciences, emphasizing that there's also supervisors that really exploit their PhD candidates, and where they use their existing power imbalance to not so much ask if they could participate meaningfully in a work project, but much rather just demand that they're on a particular paper. Knowing these sorts of things also made us wonder and ask through focus groups, also researchers from Amsterdam, what could potentially be done to improve this? And this is a somewhat cheeky excerpt from a focus group that we did with PhD candidates from the biomedical sciences, where they were very well aware that, like the audience has already enlightened us, there are courses for principal investigators. However, they're researchers, they're notoriously busy, they don't have the time, and you see them brainstorming here that maybe much rather, which is to make it compulsory, and if they don't pass, they just don't get to supervise. The other thing we learned through doing these focus groups is that some of the programs that were out there, we actually talked with people that participate in those programs, they told us the bit on research integrity, responsible research, really, really small. So with that in mind, we tried to make our own training program that we, humble as we are, dubbed Superb Supervision. And this program consisted of 3 days where we tried to integrate both interpersonal skill development for supervisors, but also improving their ability to foster responsible research practices. And we had a wonderful sample of volunteers, so in accordance with Malcolm's advice, you take this all very lightly, but they were very happy with our program, and afterwards, when we conducted focus groups to learn a little bit more, okay, how could we further extend this, then one of the typical questions was, of course, should we make it compulsory? Should we listen to those PhD candidates? And interestingly enough, our participants were a little bit worried about this. They actually believe that if you really want to become a better supervisor, you should also be willing to critically reflect on your own behaviour, potentially change your own behaviour. And if you're not willing and ready for those sort of things, your presence can really make it a toxic learning environment for other people. But good for us. We surveyed both PhD candidates and their supervisors before and after, and overall our results indicated that, both the PhD candidates and the supervisors were more positive about the supervisor's ability to foster responsible research practices. And normally, when I stop here, people are very fond, and they start to think about, okay, we should expand these sort of programs, we should test them more rigorously. And what often seems to be the case to me is that we then believe that it is the case that just by making people more knowledgeable about a particular skill, that they are going to apply it more, and if the supervisors apply responsible research practices more readily, the PhD candidates will automatically copy-paste, integrate. But is that really true? Can we even find remote precursors of evidence before we run, actually, the solid trials and interventions that we need to prove that this is working? And this is what we tried to look at in one of our latest studies on the role modelling of supervisors. So here I'll only focus on a very small example of a practice of data sharing. We thought that if this is the case, then it should make a difference if you work under a supervisor that actually shares data. Then it should make you more likely to share data. And is that actually the case? And we tried to investigate this departing from PhD thesis repositories, where we then extracted who was the PhD candidate, who was their main supervisor. We dug up their recent publications, and then we screened those using the automated screening tool called OPHUB, developed by the same Nico Riedel that Malcolm already mentioned, that screens for data sharing statements in biomedical research papers. And then we later looked at all the papers where a statement was returned a little bit more closely to see the algorithm not make a mistake. This is what we found. Overall, we had a sample of 2,062 papers, and only about 9% of papers were those where the automated screening tool returned, yes, I think this is a data sharing statement. And when scrutinizing all of those by ourselves, using a standardized protocol to assess if it was genuinely open data, this number actually went down to 5%. But I think the exciting news here is, what we did find was that PhD candidates that work under a supervisor, that actually shared data, that gave the good example, have a 2 times greater odds to share data as part of their PhD thesis compared to those who did not share data. And this number actually increases when we take out the false positives. This, of course, raises the question, who then teaches who? And if you hear me talking, you might think that I sort of presume that if you work under responsible supervision, that's just going to do the trick. And, maybe it is, as Daniel Pizzolato and Chris Diederichs argue in this paper, maybe it's actually the other way around. We have so much education and training targeted at the level of the PhD candidates. Are they not much more knowledgeable about all of these practices by now? Why don't we invite them to teach the more senior people on these matters? And I would highly recommend reading this. Reality of who teaches who is probably in the middle. Maybe PhD candidates and supervisors also explore things together. And with that in mind, I went back to Lex's Open Science Framework profile, and I tried to find the very first time that Lex actually pre-registered a study on this platform. It is here. It was part of my PhD thesis, so this was the first time we both did this together. And I can tell you, I am still pre-registering, and I'm trying to persuade colleagues at other institutions to do the same. But Lex, being Lex, took this a step further. Lex, together with some other people in the room, you can see Lex here, already, I believe, multiple times surveyed all the participants from the World Conference on Research Integrity to inquire whether they actually pre-registered the work that they were going to present. And last time, even in South Africa, Lex emphasized that he was a little bit disappointed with the field as a whole because he believed we did not pre-register enough already. And I take the liberty to interpret this as Lex's attempt to leave a research climate, at least in our community, where it is behaviours like pre-registration that are supported, rewarded, and perhaps most importantly, they are to be expected. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Mari Malichki from Stanford University. We've heard from Gori as well that there's a big focus on team science, but why are we not doing team supervision? We require 2 or 3 reviewers per paper. We require, 2 or 3 reviewers per grants. We require sometimes 6 papers on co-authors. That's the medium right now in science. And yet we leave these 1 mentors to mentor 1 PhD student, and we have so many surveys saying that they can really screw up their careers, to use that language. And I think that's cultures that we don't see changing. Why are we allowing just 1 mentor?
I don't have the perfect answer to this question. What I'm going to say is I actually think that what we are currently allowing is that only 1 person gets away with the formal recognition. I actually think a lot of people do already have multiple mentors, and there's a much greater problem, as you're rightly pointing out, that we don't recognize that form of team science yet, and that the postdocs that may be doing the day-to-day supervision and are much more closely involved with getting PhD students up to scratch with the particular techniques they're applying, then they are much more likely to be the ones that actually look at their raw data, that we, even institutions, from what I've heard, have difficulty finding out, but who were these crucial people? And I think it's really time, as you say, to work much more from a model where a team of supervisors gets the recognition for getting someone across the board.
I'm Piet Borst from the Netherlands Cancer Institute. We installed thesis committees some 30 years ago, and that works very well. The committee reports to the director of research. The committee watches over the PhD student and over the supervisor. If the supervisor is not good, then action will be taken. So I think one thing that is essential, and some universities have implemented it, is to have a committee, not just 1 supervisor. The second thing is that there should be a boss who is interested in PhD students and looks at the reports of the committee. And if the committee is critical, then the boss should get into action. So that's the second point. Culture comes from the top, and if the top is stupid or not interested, then it doesn't work. So these points, I think, should be stressed.
Thank you.
I would very warmly agree and applaud the fact that we should maybe put a little bit more focus on the people that we have at the top to make sure they're smart and that they care about both the well-being but also the quality of the research of the PhD candidates. So I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Oh, I have 2 more questions. So Dr. MacLeod and then Gary. Yeah.
So you were the second speaker that used the word mandatory, and I just want to reflect or ask you to reflect a little bit on, as humans we all aspire to be better at what we do. You get up in the morning and you go for a run, not because it's mandatory, but because you'd like to feel a little bit healthier tomorrow than you did today. So why is it that we need to even consider making these training programs opportunities that will make me a better researcher? Why do we need to think about having a stick when, what's the missing carrot? Is it because the training that's provided is actually a bit shit and it doesn't really do what people expect? Or is it because people are so stretched doing their day job that they don't have the bandwidth to contribute to it and would, much more of a focus on the continuing professional development of our research community, give people the space to do those things? I mean, how can we get over this, you're going to hate it, so we're going to force you to do it?
I think, and what we're also seeing both with our training, but perhaps also within the audience's example of Rotterdam, is that we can think a little bit more critically about when it is and how it is that we offer these sorts of trainings, right? And some of the examples I've seen work rather well, at least from the sideline, are those where if people get a new grant, this is something the institution offers you to almost lend a hand of support. You just got this grant, you're potentially going to hire PhD candidates, can we help you so that you can do a better job from the start? Not so much departing from a, you're doing terrible as a mentor, you should go to this sort of punishment camp. And the typical ones that I've seen run sort of for a more prolonged period of time tend to use that sort of approach, where it is a gift, it is a form of institutional support, and it is also something where we really try to tailor it to you, because I do believe, actually, that most researchers want to become better researchers.
Please keep the mic really close to your mouth, because apparently online that's required.
Okay. So if I can actually just quickly just respond to that mandatory, because I'm one of the guilty people who use that word. So in my experience, what I found speaking with researchers is that they'd like it to be mandatory. A large part of it is due to a lack of awareness of the problems in research. So researchers enter the field with a rosy-eyed perspective of what research is. And slowly, somewhere down the line in their research career, they become quite jaded. And I think when the training becomes mandatory, it just solves a lot of problems for them to be able to justify spending time going to the training. And the mandatory training also helps to open up the eyes of the more rosy-colored researchers who are entering the research field. With a total lack of awareness, that questionable research practices happen very frequently. So that's my 2 cents of using the word mandatory. So my quick question for Tamarinde was...
really quick.
Perfect.
This is cheating. Really quick.
Very quick. Just to ask you actually on the data sharing statements, I was wondering whether did you ever consider to go a step further and really see whether the authors would respond with data? Because we know that many researchers are checking a box when it comes to, reporting that they have a data statement. But did you consider of going a step beyond to it?
We completely did, and I'm happy to share the preprint where I had the privilege to work with the BOH Quest Centre, where part of the things they do is they give out awards for whether people can select I shared my data, and they then have to really check before they of course give you that financial reward for sharing your data. So I cannot say that it's completely compliant with the FAIR criteria, but I can tell you that me and my students have manually checked and verified that all of those data sets actually exist, have an open license, are on a repository, and are accessible and findable.
Thank you so much, Tamarinde.